Welcome to Wildside, your wild true crime podcast.
We're your hosts, who are sisters, storytellers, and truth seekers.
I'm Bailey, a therapist who is fascinated by all weird and dark human behaviors.
And I'm Chelsea, an educator here to unearth the facts behind the cases.
We cover true crime because some cases are just too dark to forget,
and others are too wild to ignore.
We're so glad you're here, so buckle up
and enjoy the ride.
What's up, Wildsiders? Welcome back.
It's officially spring. Spring has sprung, and I hope you're doing okay.
Spring has sprung, and we're about to spring into this shit show of a case. So, welcome back to our short sides, the little bit more lighthearted, a little bit more fun. And today, you guys, first, Chelsea, didn't you have a shout out that you wanted to give?
I did. So we had an Instagram follower who left us a message. And so we just wanted to say thank you to Sab Against Abuse. She just said, you guys are awesome. And we said, thank you. Thank you. Some days we are.
Said you were doing the Lord's work or karma's work or all things that are good. No, she didn't say that. But she just said thank you for what you're doing. And she was just all over the interview with Marie about the sexual assault nurse examiner. So thank you. Thank you, Sab Against Abuse. We appreciate you.
Yeah.
And as you guys know, this is interview week. Chelsea and I have been swamped. I'm so sorry. I know that interviews have been a little spotty, but it's just been a lot. It's been a lot, and things have been falling through, and we've had to reschedule with like 3 different people. But we have a family of a case that we covered, family members from a case we covered that reached out, and they agreed to do an interview. And fingers crossed, we're going to try to release that on Friday if everything goes smoothly. But there's a chance that we might not be able to get it out in time. And just know if we can't, we will try to maybe do it the following week. So sorry, you guys, but just bear with us because we do this as a hobby. This is not our full-time job. So this stuff just happens. Life happens, and we have to prioritize our families over the hobby. So hopefully you guys can understand that.
Well, and this was really one of the most interesting cases that we've covered. So if you enjoyed the case of Jean Tourneau and Bob Peterson,
we'll put it in the link too when we publish the episode. Yeah.
And you will get a very rare opportunity to listen to an inside perspective from somebody whose loved one was affected by a violent murder. So like I said, I hope you guys find this as awesome as we did.
Yeah, so we'll keep you posted. It'll show up on Friday or it won't. But know that we are working diligently to try to be as consistent as possible. So we love you guys for being patient with us.
Absolutely.
And so now we are going to spring into this short side. And our theme for this week, drum roll, this is when death plays dirty.
Sometimes it be like that.
It'd be like that sometimes. And so per usual short side fashion, Chelsea and I are going to do blind readings of cases regarding like bizarre deaths. This is like Final Destination in real life. And doesn't seem real, but it absolutely is.
And if you guys have not seen at least the original Final Destination movie, shame on you, because you need to live with that trauma just like Bailey and I have for the past 20 years. Every time we drive past a truck carrying lumber.
I was literally going to say that, and immediately put your blinker on to get out from behind a log truck.
Yeah.
So our whole generation knows that.
Mm-hmm.
And so for my little version of today's case, this is actually in the great country of France.
Oh, we are France.
We are France. So I so apologize to all of my French out there my Frenchians, my Francians. If I pronounce this thing, all these words terribly, French is not a good language for me. Are you ready for this, Chelsea?
Let's do it. I
Okay.
love Shortcides.
I know, they're so much fun. And so this starts on a warm summer evening. And on this warm summer evening, 69-year-old Lucien Perot settled in at his garden table for what would be his final meal, but he did not know that.
Mm.
A red and white checkered cloth covered the table, set with a modest feast: rib steak, canned beans, camembert cheese, and a
Mm.
fresh baguette.
Mm. Oh, I can taste it.
Seated across from him was his close friend, Olivier Boudin, 31 years his junior. Laughter filled the air, music played in the background, and glasses of red wine flowed freely.
Mm.
Despite their age differences and their overall differences, one was retired, the other was unemployed, the two men had formed a strong bond of friendship over the years. They had been sharing a meal in Perot's garden at the quiet village of Autun du Perchet, which is about 150 kilometers southwest of Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where things take a really deadly turn. The two men's company had spilled over into the morning. Now, dinners in Europe tend to last hours as it's like a social atmosphere, so it's really no surprise that they would be together, having dinner for that many hours. However, the following morning, a neighbor passing by around 6 a.m. that morning saw Olivier Boudin, 38, lying on his back on the ground while Lucien still sat at the terrace table, his half-eaten meal still before him: camembert, a partially consumed baguette, and a glass of wine. The neighbor at the time didn't really think too much of it, right? She just assumed that the two men had gotten drunk and were simply sleeping off a night of heavy drinking. Fair. She said, "At first, I just thought that they had been really drunk to still be out there sleeping, but when I saw Lucien still sitting at the table hours later, I figured it must have been an exceptionally wild night." But by midday, the neighbor again walked past Lucien's terrace and immediately noticed that the two men had not moved an inch since she had last seen them. This was unnatural. Now she's really concerned, and she walks over to the two men and attempted to wake them, only to make the grim discovery that both Lucien Perot and Olivier Boudin were dead. She immediately notified the village authorities, and when they arrived to the scene, they were just as taken aback as the neighbor was who had found them. How on earth did this happen in such a small and close-knit community? As investigators began working the crime scene, news spread like wildfire throughout the village, and speculation began to swirl. Now, what stumped investigators were that there was absolutely zero signs of foul play when they were first looking into the scene. There was no signs of a struggle, no evidence of a break-in or a robbery, and no apparent cause for their sudden deaths. So it seemed that the two men just killed over right then and there in Lucien's terrace. The village mayor, Patrice Leriger, even described the bizarre and eerie scene to reporters, describing the men's unfinished meals and the really weird stillness. It was like a jubilant scene of a movie that had been paused. He added that it felt as though time had suddenly stopped. Their expressions were serene, as though they were asleep. So it didn't take long for local and national news again to get hold of this super bizarre double death story. The unexplained nature of the men's deaths absolutely fueled the media frenzy, with people diving headfirst into the wildest theories as to what could have happened, right? Some of the speculation that swirled was that the quiet village might have become the backdrop for a gripping crime story, the kind that fills newspapers during slow summer months. What if the two men had been shot in a random act of violence, like a drive-by or an initiation killing? What if they owed people money and the killers came to claim their debts? There were so many wild theories circulating that the small and quaint village was getting almost too much publicity to handle. The crime scene was frozen in one single moment, right? It's like a Polaroid picture. One man is dead on the ground, the other still slumped in his chair, and there's absolutely no indication of what had happened. Investigators were still puzzled as to what could have killed both men at the exact same time, and quite frankly, they were just at a total loss. There is, again, no apparent signs of a struggle or robbery in Lucien's home, so that really kind of ruled out the theory that there was third-party involvement. And so this paved the way for people to consider like some weird pseudo-suicide pact. They were like, maybe both men wanted to control when and how they died, and they wanted to go together. But this idea of this weird double suicide pact seemed pretty far-fetched and was met with a lot of skepticism. Villagers and acquaintances of the men were just like, nah, that doesn't really fit. Specifically with Lucien, villagers recalled that the days leading up to his death, he was in really good spirits. So the suicide piece, didn't really seem to add up. One neighbor, however, had a different theory, a death suicide. He speculated that maybe one of the men had died and the other couldn't bear the loss and took his own life. This, too, seemed to be something that just didn't really fit with the personalities of the men, and again, of like their reports from family and friends leading up to their deaths. Finally, the investigators decided to look into poisoning. Whether accidental or intentional, poisoning began to emerge as the leading theory because there was honestly nothing else to go off of. Attention quickly turned to the tin of beans, and they thought maybe there's a bunch of botulism in the beans. This seemed to be the most rational theory so far. So, with nothing else to go off of, investigators sent the beans to the Pasteur Institute in Paris for analysis. And after some time, the results were in. There was absolutely no trace of botulism detected in the beans. Not deterred, investigators stuck to the food poisoning angle and decided to send the remaining meal components in for analysis as well. Again, nothing. There was no signs from any of the food tested that poisoning was the culprit of the double deaths. What do you think is happening, Chelsea?
I mean, I was really rooting for the botulism, but I guess that is out.
Right, because death plays dirty.
Death does.
Botulism would be a dirty death.
So the only thing I can think of is if this was in a different setting, like in New Orleans, for example, they would have been shot by some random bullet that somebody had shot up into the air, had done a 180 and come down and hit them like both in the head or something crazy like that. But last, you know what I mean? Like, because I don't know, things happen during Mardi Gras, but again, that's the only thing I got, and we're not in New Orleans, so.
Yeah, or a Tuesday, but whatever.
Or a Tuesday. There was drinking involved, and that did make me think of New Orleans.
Yeah. By this time, police seem to have exhausted all leads into the deaths of Lucien Perot and Olivier Boudin. The only thing that they had left was to wait on the autopsies. The medical examiner quickly began the autopsies for both men, as I'm sure there was a lot of pressure from law enforcement and the public to finally have answers to such a bizarre mystery. Now, the first thing that the medical examiner noticed is that it was clear that both men had been drinking pretty heavily. Lucien's blood alcohol content, or it measured between, it was a 2.4 grams per liters, which I think is like a 0.2 to a 0.3 blood alcohol content, BAC. In this range, there's oftentimes like confusion, vomiting, drowsiness, things like that. But the BACs for both men just weren't high enough where you would expect something like alcohol poisoning or like it to trigger a life-threatening condition or loss of consciousness or something like that. So that didn't really give an indication of death. However, it wouldn't take long for the truth of the weirdly bizarre deaths of the two men that would finally come to light. By the completion of the autopsy, the cause of death for Lucien and Olivier would be confirmed by the postmortem results. It turns out that 69-year-old Lucien Perot did not die by poison or suicide or blunt force trauma. He died by choking on a large piece of beef rib. Yep, you heard that correctly. He choked. The medical examiner speculated that this was likely due to the heightened alcohol content and his difficulty chewing due to missing teeth. And Olivier, well, the medical examiner found that he had an underlying genetic heart condition and had suffered a fatal heart attack. So, what are the odds that both men died at the exact same time? Well, turns out it wasn't fully a coincidence after all. What ended up happening was that, or what we think happened, was that as Lucien was choking to death, Olivier, who again already had this underlying genetic heart condition, is believed to have suffered a fatal heart attack in the shock of witnessing his friend's sudden violent death. Yep. One man choked and the other one had a heart attack from watching him choke.
I have so many thoughts. I'm like, why didn't you perform the Heimlich? But I mean, again, if they were heavily intoxicated, I'm sure it was like, what are you doing? Why are you choking? Ha ha, he he. And then it was like, oh gosh, oh no, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, that's not real. This is not a real story.
So Lucien struggled to chew his food, choked on a chunk of meat, and while he was choking, his friend Olivier, so upset by watching his friend die, had a massive heart attack and they died at the same time.
I just would love to know the math, like the statistical possibilities of that. You know, like there's no way. How does that happen? How does that happen?
Oh, right. And this is why we say that death fights dirty. Like, death was like, okay, I'm sorry if this is crass, but I'm going to kill two birds with one stone here. And I'm going to have one dude choke, traumatize his buddy so much that he's going to die of a heart attack. And he was like, and I don't even have to like leave my lair to do anything about it.
Oh gosh. Oh my gosh.
At Au Bon Coin, the local bistro where the two men were known and cherished, the owner described them as inseparable, almost like a father-son duo. The bond between them was strong, and their death seemed almost surreal to the locals. Despite the tragic nature of the loss, there was a sense of relief in the community that the deaths weren't part of something darker. It wasn't like they were targeted by the mafia or owed people money or anything like that. But for some, like the owner of Au Bon Coin, the loss was more than just an accident. It was a stupid death, a needless tragedy. He said, quote, if only Lucien had taken his time with the steak, he could have enjoyed many more meals. The weight of what could have been a few more moments, a few more bites, a few more days hung in the air, leaving a lingering sense of what was lost.
I hate to be that person, but this is like a real deal. Like anytime you go to the dentist and they're like, are you flossing? Are you brushing? Do you realize that gum disease can lead to tooth loss? I don't think everybody thinks that this can cause you major issues in your life if you cannot chew your food. So,
Well, we
this is
can't
our,
assume that
this
they
is our
weren't
health
taking care of their
hour.
teeth. Maybe it was a genetic thing. Maybe it was, I mean, I think they have like, I mean, I know that they have different healthcare things over there. So I don't know what it's like in France with the healthcare and all that stuff and the dental care and
No,
blah, blah, blah.
I'm not saying, all I'm saying is this is why healthcare providers, dental hygienists, like my previous self would say, we really want you to take this serious, whatever the reason may be. I've seen lots of genetic cases. I've seen this stuff. But again, people are always like, it's your teeth. That just seems to be the rule of thumb. So your health talk hour is, please do your dental checkups. Please replace your missing teeth if you can.
Chew
And
your food
take
thoroughly.
your food 30 times before you swallow. We're going to leave it at that. Moral of the story. And also get your heart checked out. My goodness. Can you imagine?
No, I cannot.
Well,
I'm just curious to know what you found. If I found this, I am curious to know what you scraped out of the bottom of this barrel.
I was going to say in this trend of just kind of ridiculous deaths, I am going to ask you, and I know you do. I feel like everybody remembers the lyrics to this song, but in 2012, Alicia Keys produced a song, and in that song, she sang, "This girl is on fire."
Oh
Do you
God, this
remember?
is going to be so inappropriate. I already know. I just want you guys to know, and I don't mean this as a jab to anybody on the spectrum, right? I have lots of love for that. But Chelsea has a touch of the tism and not understanding social cues with like, oh, this is probably going to be like a really sad and tragic thing. Let me pair a really great song and make everybody really awkward with it.
All I'm saying is, when I think of this song, I don't think of it literally. She didn't write it to mean literally this girl is on fire. But in this case, we are going to find that there was some literal combustion going on.
Oh God, yeah, and that fits. There's Chelsea, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, I apologize. That's where my brain went. And I'm going to now tell you about the really bizarre death of Mary Reeser.
Okay.
Now, I know that you hate historic cases. I love them. This is kind of in the middle. This happened in 1951, but
Mm-hmm.
it's just really kind of an ongoing thing, if you will. So, Mary Reeser on July 1st, 1951, was 67 years old, and she lived a simple and peaceful life. Her husband had passed away, unfortunately, and she settled into a small apartment in St. Petersburg, Florida, which that's on the Gulf of Mexico side, right? The pretty side of Florida. I don't think there are many sharks over there either. And she did her typical, Meemaw life. She enjoyed her routine activities like reading, knitting, and writing letters to her children, because remember, it's 1951.
Aw,
And
this is
she,
going so well.
I know. Well, again, it's bad, but I don't know. We'll see what you think. She was not the type of woman to make any headlines. She didn't even really make waves, right? Just your typical, her name's Mary Reeser. Like, how sweet is that? And on July 1st, 1951, her life unfortunately would take a tragic turn, and she would then go in to be in headlines all over the world and can still be seen in case reports to this day, in case studies to this day.
Weird.
So on that night, July 1st, 1951. She had had a visit with her son. She had spoke with him on the phone, and she had mentioned that she had taken some sleeping pills, right? And she was getting ready for bed. She decided to enjoy a cigarette before unwinding and going to bed. Again, we are in 1951, and I think everybody enjoyed a cigarette
And I'm
before
sure
they.
she had great silk slippers,
She probably did.
like
And
Grammy.
those, I was gonna say, and those long, like they're not muumuus, like they
Right.
literally like were house gowns that I
Mhm.
remember me wearing, and I just imagine it being fabulous. Although I can smell that room. So she did. She decided to enjoy a cigarette before finally unwinding and going to bed. Now, her landlady, Pansy Carpenter, was the last person to see her alive. And according to Miss Carpenter, Mary had seemed cheerful and in good spirits, right? Just a same ordinary day. But by the morning, everything had changed. At 8 a.m. on July the 2nd, Mrs. Carpenter arrived at Mary's apartment with a telegram, which that in itself I think is kind of ironic. Like, what are the odds that she received a telegram that early in the morning? But she did. And when she goes to the door, she immediately notices that the metal doorknob felt almost hot to the touch, right? Not,
Weird.
yeah, not like burning your hand, but like this is too warm for 8 o'clock in the morning to the touch, right?
Mhm.
So alarmed, she called for help, called 911, and soon authorities forced their way inside. But Bailey, what they discovered really seems to defy all logic and reason. Inside the small apartment, investigators were met with this rather eerie and macabre sight. It was a literal burn pile in an armchair. Okay? Like a
Okay.
burn pile and an armchair.
Mhm.
And they would later come to find out that that burn pile was Mary Reeser.
The the burn pile in the chair was Grandma
Was,
Mary?
was Grandma Mary. So her remains were nothing short of disturbing. She was she had been reduced to about 10 pounds of ash. However, her entire left foot with the slipper
I
still
knew it. I
attached,
knew she was wearing slippers.
she was wearing slippers, was there at the base of the chair. They also, when they were, of course, very sensitively digging through the ashes, they found pieces of her backbone and also pieces of the spinal column. And they did find an organ, which they later identified as her liver, that was adhered to pieces of the spinal column. The last thing that they found was her skull. But what was wild is that the skull was the size of a teacup, like literally could fit the entire skull
This
in
is
there.
not Beetlejuice.
I know. It's seriously, that is
No, this is
exactly
not
what they
how it
found.
works.
No, I know.
Skulls
And
don't
that,
shrink in heat.
I know. That seriously, that is, and this is where we're literally going to get into how crazy this case became, because it just so happened that that claim that the skull was shrunken down to the size of a teacup was really challenged by a fire expert who happened to be in Bradenton, which is a town about 45 minutes outside of St. Petersburg. He was there for a conference, and kind of word got out that he was there on a conference, and they called him in like, hey, while you're this close, will you come and check this?
Will you come look at
He-
this teacup-sized
this
skull?
teacup-sized skull. And he's like, there's
Whatever.
no way. There's no way this is the skull. It defies all physics, science, all the things. Plastic household items located away from the fire's origin had melted and lost their original shape. And her body had pretty much, other than, like I said, her left foot, kind of from the ankle down, had been completely consumed by the fire, right? But
Hattie set her on
everything,
fire.
what is that?
Hattie set her on fire.
No, 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 she didn't. That's the thing, though, is that nothing else in the house, nothing else in the apartment was touched. Everything else. No, like, black spot on the wall where maybe an electrical fire had started. Like, it literally was just in her armchair, and a couple of feet in every direction, like the radius from the heat are the only things that had been touched. So the and what's crazy is even parts of the armchair was still intact, right? So parts of the
No.
armchair, the walls, the ceilings, everything was intact. There was
There
no
was no
smoke.
smoke on the.
No, no soot, no ash, no, anything like that.
It was like somebody threw her in a incinerator and then like dumped her
And
ashes in a
then
chair.
exactly, like, picked her up, put her in that small piece of the armchair in the incinerator, and then put it all back together, right? And again, there was no sign of an explosion. There was no traditional fire marks, no signs of arson. I mean, literally, it was like it had been encapsulated into the Twilight Zone, and they forgot to clean it up when the aliens left, type of thing. It was the most bizarre, right? And they brought in experts from everywhere. Fire investigators came in and they were at a loss. Now, when they were calibrating how big, how intense this fire was, they assumed, or they were, what's the word I'm looking for? They confirmed that for a human body to be reduced to ashes like that, this temperature had to exceeded about 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. 2,000 degrees
That's hot.
Fahrenheit.
That's hot.
Huh?
That's hot.
That's real hot. Like, that's
That's
hotter
hot.
than Florida in July hot,
Yeah, it's
right?
hot.
Like,
South Mississippi in hurricane season hot.
yeah. Now, I think this comes as no surprise, but the bizarre and unexplained nature of Mary Reeser's death quickly caught the attention of the media, with reporters flocking to the scene and spreading wild theories about what had happened, right? So again, kind of like in our buddies, you know,
Lucien and Olivier.
Lucien and Olivier, they had all sorts of theories at this point. So theory number one was, some experts speculated that perhaps Mary had fallen asleep with a lit cigarette, which had ignited her clothing, and the fire could have then burned in a manner that focused only on her body without spreading to the rest of the room.
I'm pretty
But
sure that this is, I know I've heard of this in like some portion of my life, and that's why I have this belief. I think it's like a shared human belief that like you can't smoke cigarettes when you have oxygen, right? Because it's flammable. Did she have oxygen?
no, I mean, not other than just the oxygen that was in the room.
But not
But
like she wasn't on an
wasn't on
oxygen
a
tank.
tank. No, no. And so they, again, they thought that maybe this cigarette had ignited her clothes while she was asleep. But this theory was met with resistance, as there was no evidence of, burn markings on the area around the armchair or on the armchair itself. Like, you couldn't pinpoint where that cigarette could have started. Now, again, she was reduced to ashes, so a lot of this had to be filled in. And then furthermore, they were thinking, how could a simple cigarette produce the temperatures that were high enough to essentially cremate a body while
Right.
leaving the nearby furniture intact? So that theory really got squashed pretty quickly. Now, theory number two was that an intense fire had been caused by a chemical reaction within Mary's body, potentially linking the medication that she had taken, the sleeping pills, right, combined with a pre-existing health condition, which might have created a volatile mixture that set off a chain of events leading to a fire.
Could you imagine peeling a label off that medicine bottle and it's just like side effect warning could cause a chemical reaction and have you spontaneously cremated in your armchair?
Right. I mean, it does sound like one of those late night medication commercials. Like, if
Right.
you
If
or
you have
anybody you've ever
mesothelioma.
known has
Yeah.
ever taken this medication and turned into, a bad cremation project, please call this 800 number. So here we get to number 3. And this one is quite interesting to me. So there is this phenomenon that they call the wick effect. And the wick effect is this idea that Mary's, or a person, Mary's in this case, her body fat could have sustained a slow, intense fire over several hours. And that would effectively cremate her remains. It's much like a candle wick surrounded by wax, right? So a fire could have been
But
started.
wouldn't it be melty?
Right, you would think it would be kind of gooey. I don't know. Because again, if you think of melted wax, you do think of liquefied things that were heated, but this was cremated. This was desecrated. This was ash.
Right, because if it were me, I would be like that green ghost off of Ghostbusters when he explodes. It'd
Yeah.
be everywhere.
Well, I mean, with the amount of fat that I have on me, I would still be burning to this day.
I know.
Like,
It'd be like Chernobyl. It's like radioactive 25 years later. Like they're still burning.
like 1951 to 2024, there would still be a flicker on my fat
Be
layer.
smoldering.
Now, okay, here we go. Theory number 4. And this one really seems to be the most plausible theory. Theory number 4 is that Mary's death might have been the result of, again, another phenomena called SHC, which is spontaneous human combustion. So hashtag nightmares unlocked. If you did not realize that this was a literal thing,
Like
you're welcome.
spontaneous combusting. People joke about that, but
Yeah. No, it's a very rare, and again, it is controversial, but it is a phenomena in which a human body is said to burst into flames without any external ignition source.
my God, do you know how traumatic that would be? To like be sitting
Well,
with lunch with your friend, chewing on a steak and choking is traumatic, but sitting there with your BFF and they just burst into flame in front of
burst
you.
burst into flame. I mean, I'm sorry. This is why I thought of, like, this girl is on fire. Like, how does that
There
fire
it is.
start?
There it is.
Now, what's crazy is this is not just like, oh, we've seen this over the last few years. It's because of GMOs or blah, 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 something weird. No, the first recorded case of this spontaneous combustion was in a Latin manuscript written by a Danish physician in 1654.
Wow.
So there have been recordings of this throughout history, literally since 1654. And now, obviously, because there have been recordings of SHC, I mean, that doesn't mean that there's not still a ton of controversy around this, right? And it's still debated among scientists with no conclusive evidence ever present to prove it, right? Like, they still can't prove this phenomenon. They know it exists, they've seen it, they've experienced it, but they can't prove it. So supporters of the SHC theory argue that some unknown chemical reaction within the body, possibly involving static electricity, methane gases, or even an unverifiable biological process, could trigger an internal fire that burns the body from the inside out.
That's pretty terrifying.
The fact that Mary's body had been almost entirely consumed while the surrounding environment remains intact seems to be the most plausible theory, right? However, scientists were quick to dismiss the idea because there was no solid evidence to back this theory up. The skeptics claimed that there was no conclusive evidence that has ever proven that the human body can spontaneously ignite, right? Even though there, again, are examples of it, they just can't definitively say that's what caused the ignition. And the theory remains largely in the realm of pseudoscience. Experts argued that the fire could have been the result of some external cause, but one that was not immediately visible to the investigators. The fact that the fire has consumed only Mary's body and not the rest of the room seems too strange to be explained by a traditional fire. Again, could there have been an unseen accelerant or substance that triggered an intense blaze? Despite the flurry of theories, investigators wanted to wait for more scientific evidence in the wake of struggling to find a plausible explanation for Mary Reeser's death. Investigators sent Mary's remains to experts for further analysis. Now, one expert is Dr. Wilton M. Krogman, and he is a physical anthropologist at the University of Pennsylvania School of Medicine, and he is also a world-renowned expert on the effects of fire on the human body. I mean, how cool is that that is your expertise? Even Dr. Krogman finally gave up trying to figure out what happened, and he said, quote, "I regard it as the most amazing thing I have ever seen. As I review it, the short hairs on my neck bristle with vague fear. Were I living in the Middle Ages, I'd mutter something about black magic," right? So here we have a brilliant anthropologist, a brilliant scientific mind who still was stumped by this. Again, there were no indications on Mary's body that pointed to homicide, suicide, or any forced types of death. There was also no definitive cause for the fire that consumed Mary's body, and no clear explanation for the unusual pattern of the blaze. Despite extensive investigation by authorities, including the FBI and fire experts, no definitive cause of the fire was ever determined, and the official report acknowledged that Mary Reeser had died in an intense fire, but the origin of that fire remained unknown. Now, this case is one that would live on in infamy. It sparked debates over the possibility of spontaneous human combustion, which continues to capture the public's imagination. Some researchers have tried to replicate the conditions of the fire, but no one has yet been able to recreate such an event under controlled conditions. Theories about spontaneous combustion remains a fringe topic in scientific circles, with many dismissing it as pseudoscience or an urban legend. Still, the story of Mary Reeser endures, and it continues to intrigue those who are fascinated by the unexplained. So what really happened on that fateful night in 1951? Was it spontaneous human combustion, SHC? Was it a free chemical reaction? Or an undiscovered cause we've yet to understand? Again, unfortunately, Mary Reeser's death has left us with more questions than answers. And decades later, the mystery of what happened in that small Florida apartment remains unsolved.
This is seriously Final Destination shit.
Well, and for those, for those of you who are like, that's incorrect, you can view the original.
Yeah, the crime scene photos, I had to look it up, and I saw her whole ass foot, by a pile of
ash in a partially burned, but the part that is burned is completely incinerated, burned chair. And there is actually a really great article that I read on this, and it goes through the history of spontaneous human combustion. And you can read through various cases throughout history. Now, some are postmortem combustion. Let's hope that all of them are postmortem combustion, right? Let's hope that maybe, I surely hope that something happened and sweet Miss Mary passed away, and then for whatever reason, her body combusted. But I mean, it's plausible to think that as the body is decomposing, once it dies, it does start dying, right? Decomposing. So maybe there is a release of gases or something, and I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I have been going down like rabbit holes since you've been reading this case, and I found this one comment that says, maybe she said, I thought they found out that it was creams used for body, like body creams, that was high paraben concentrations, and the nylon clothes. And if the cigarette caught that on fire, it's highly flammable.
Right. But I think the issue that I have with that, even if you were asleep, if your body is caught on fire and you're alive, wouldn't that wake you up? You know what I mean? Like, you would think that it would wake you up and that there would be some sign of a struggle. She was late, she had fallen out of the chair. I don't know. Like, in my mind, that's where I go. So that's why I'm wondering if she had possibly passed away from natural causes. And again, this phenomena of spontaneous combustion ensued after that.
That is wild. Wild, wild, wild.
But I imagine that, obviously not this particular case, but if you've noticed on a lot of children's pajamas now, when you go to the store, they have that like fire safety warning on pajamas, and it'll say things like, this is a non-flammable material. So I think the fashion, quote unquote, the clothing industry, if you will, has started to realize things like sleeping in synthetic materials and, how dangerous they can be. So I don't know. Like you said, was it a mixture of face cream and nylon and synthetic polyesters that were ignited by a cigarette that she had still lit in her hand? No, Bailey.
Yeah. That is haunting. So make sure to not smoke in your favorite chair and fall asleep, possibly.
I was going to say, get your teeth checked, chew your food, and don't fall asleep with your cig.
Oh, this is nuts. So for next Shortsides, you guys submit themes to us. Reach out, Facebook, Instagram, whatevs. Let us know what kind of themes you'd like. Petty crimes and petty results for petty reasons. Do you want the dumbest criminals? Like, what are some fun wild side themes that you can think of? And until then, you guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us through this wild and crazy ride.
And as always, we will catch you on the wild side.
Bye, guys.
Later, Gators.